Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. This is the part of the show where we go across the pond to Europe to see what's going on over there when it comes to cannabis and hemp products. This week, Italy basically shut down the hemp industry in that country and turned it into a criminal endeavor. Ben Stevens from the Business of Cannabis in Europe has that story.
I'm Ben Stevens with Business of Cannabis with this week's news from Europe for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, the Italian hemp industry, already on its knees, has been dealt a second and probably fatal blow. Last week, the Meloni government pushed through legislation under emergency rules, meaning that it effectively bypassed Parliament and was implemented overnight, which equated all hemp flower, so hemp for our purposes is any cannabis with less than 0.3% THC, with high THC cannabis, making the entire industry effectively criminal overnight, wiping out some 2 billion euros worth of revenue for the Italian economy and making some 30,000 people supported by this industry criminals. So the one reprieve following last week's ruling was that CBD products, CBD oils made from the seeds and stalks of hemp were effectively exempt from this ruling because it only covers hemp flower. In a separate ruling this week in the Court of Appeals, in a case that's been going since 2020, in a massive U-turn from the court, who has rejected this bill twice because of the lack of scientific evidence, all CBD oils, regardless of how they're made, even if they're made from seeds and stalks, are now also considered a narcotic, meaning they cannot be bought from pharmacies over the counter, they can't be bought from hemp shops, they must be prescribed by a medical professional. Now, some court cases and challenges are already being brought by the industry, but for now it looks like the industry is effectively done. Very disappointing news from Europe, but that's all from me this week. I'm Ben Stevens with Business of Cannabis, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Whether you are a fan of former heavyweight champion Mike Tyson or not, he has jumped into the cannabis industry and built one of the most successful celebrity brands with his cannabis company, Karma Hold. Tyson said his company was built on the belief that powerful stories and products can change how people connect with wellness, entertainment, and culture. So now, if that brand fails, it will be his fault and responsibility, since this week he named himself the company CEO. In California, Dina Nagib has the story of a lab in the Golden State that continues to be in trouble with that state's regulators. Here's Dina.
I'm Dina Nagib, Principal Consultant at Grass Goddess Consulting, here to give you the latest news in Southern California for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Last week, the Department of Cannabis Control said that it's suspending the license of a cannabis testing facility, Bell Costa Labs Long Beach, as it has engaged in activity that puts public health, safety, and welfare at risk. The specific issues are failing to accurately report microbial impurities, inaccurate cannabinoid potency reporting, not collecting representative samples, incomplete chain of custody forms, abuse of track and trace login credentials, and insufficient training or experience of lab workers. The DCC directed the lab to cease operations immediately. In other news, there was a rally at LA City Hall last Wednesday, organized by the Black Los Angeles Cannabis Council, to show the city that the way social equity has been handled for the past 7 years is unacceptable. Rally goers are fed up with the Department of Cannabis regulation and presented a list of issues, specifically how the social equity funds have been mismanaged, how licenses have been delayed, policies that have favored non-minority businesses, resources promised were not delivered, allowing the illegal market to persist, and insane tax burdens. At the rally, Elliot Lewis from Catalyst spoke and announced that his operation would stop paying the city of LA any taxes effective immediately in protest, and asked others to join. Social equity programs have been mismanaged, and the industry is fed up. I'm Dina Nagib from Grass Goddess Consulting, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There's another athlete who's bringing his brand to the city of New York, where he played for 7 years. It's Carmelo Anthony. The first ballot Hall of Famer has teamed up with cannabis entrepreneur Jesse Horton and creative director Brandon Drew Jordan Pierce. Carmelo is excited to bring this craft cannabis brand to the Big Apple. Should be good. We'll wait and see. Now let's check in Chicago with the Chicago clone guy, Mark Allen, who is all excited about his state of Illinois allowing the legal gifting of cannabis. Here's Mark.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy, reporting from just outside of Chicago, Illinois. This is Bird. Thanks for tuning in to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Always something going on here in Illinois. Illinois is now launching their new registration portal for current and new medical patients or people that want to be medical patients. They're transitioning from an old system into what we believe is going to be an extension pretty much of Salesforce. So we'll see how this goes. I've had experience with Salesforce in the past, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's confusing, so I'm sure it will be interesting. But I've actually gone online and actually already had to re-register because we had to get new usernames and passwords. So I went on and redid that, but I didn't see anything specific that said I had to, even though I know I have to. So I'm sure there's going to be some issues coming up with that new transition to that system. But, growing pains with anything new, with technology. In other news, the state was questioned if gifting marijuana to other, people 21 of age or older was legal. So, long story short, they put their money where their mouth is, and the state literally put in writing that you are allowed to gift marijuana to people of legal age here in the state of Illinois. And if you are ever in Illinois, I think you should gift it to me. Hit me in the messages. Just kidding. But no, I'm not. Anyways, that's pretty cool news. Also, some things going on. We reported recently that Metric is going to be the new seed to sale system for all the commercial grows and facilities and dispensaries. That's actually going to be starting July 1st. Word through the grapevine is that this system's got some problems. So we're going to see what happens with that. The people on the inside are saying that it's going to create more costs, it's going to create more training, more confusion. And they're also saying that the RFID tag chips that the state says are going to be free and no charge are expensive and going to be an issue. But time will tell with that. But that sums up the news for just outside of Chicago and surrounding Illinois areas for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago Clone Guy. Chicago Clone Guy checking out. Take care.
In New York this week, NYC Hybrid has filed a lawsuit challenging that state's labor peace agreement provisions. Having an active labor peace agreement is part of that state's regulations for the industry. NYC Hybrid operates a dispensary called Gotham, located in Brooklyn. Now, let's check in on Oregon and see if the violent crime wave targeting cannabis businesses has eased at all. Here's Marianne Cursetjee with that story.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. 420 is shaping up to be a fantastic weekend here in the Northwest. Sunny skies and blue skies are making everything smell and look like spring. Saturday is the OG Invitational Competition, where judges blind test flower and a winner is announced. Winning in Oregon is a huge deal, as Oregon is known for its craft quality flower. Next, the OLCC continues to publicize its report on intoxicating hemp products. In addition to regulating cannabis and liquor, the OLCC is now pushing to have regulatory powers over hemp. Oregon is already one of the most restrictive states, so this seems to be another excuse to hamper the cannabis industry. And finally, legendary Oregon brand Alibi is now available in New York. Alibi participated in the Latinas in Cannabis event at Happy Monkey and is available in licensed retailers around the state. That's the Oregon Cannabis Report. I'm Marianne with Alibi for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In Maryland this week, lawmakers were busy. That state is still trying to figure out how to run their own social consumption lounges, which continues to be a challenge everywhere in the United States. Plus, regulators are tweaking some more rules and regulations about the exchange of weed from employers to employees. Here's Christopher Bright in Maryland.
Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Christopher Bright from the Enlightened Voice, bringing you the latest cannabis headlines from Maryland. Maryland lawmakers have passed a bill clarifying rules for marijuana consumption lounges and revising cannabis business regulations, now awaiting the governor's signature. The measure, backed by the Maryland Cannabis Administration, defines policies for on-site consumption sites, allowing cannabinoid beverages with up to 5 milligrams of THC per serving. Lounges can operate as a food service facilities offering non-infused food alongside marijuana products, but must secure building and occupancy permits. Localities can ban indoor smoking or vaping, though outdoor use may be permitted. The bill also greenlights a second cannabis licensing lottery depending on a disparity study to check for discrimination against minority and women-owned firms. Up to 25 growers, 25 processors, and 120 dispensary licenses could be issued, plus 10 incubation spaces and 15 consumption lounges. Additionally, cannabis license holders can now sell their business to employees, bypassing a 5-year waiting period. Medical dispensaries get an extension to deliver products until July 2026. And now we celebrate our content creator of the week. I would like to shine a spotlight on Dexter, aka Nerdy Stoner Podcast, or Chef Bois Dex. Dexter is a breath of fresh air, bridging the gaps between black nerds and stoner culture. Whether you enjoy his witty banter on his podcast, seeing him in cosplay at your favorite con while interviewing people, or just looking at his mouth-watering dishes, Dexter has a little bit of it all. Make sure to go check out his podcast on Spotify at The Nerdy Stoner and follow his IG at Nerdy Stoner Pod. This has been this week's Maryland Cannabis Report. I'm Christopher Bright from the Enlightened Voice, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One of the most fascinating stories that has emerged from the Farm Bill of 2018 is the development of the billion-dollar hemp market. The products are considered legal since they were all created with just 0.3% THC in dry weight, which is the legal definition of hemp. Human behavior, being what it is, has contributed to the development and sale of thousands of hemp products featuring flower, vapes, and edibles. This week, one of the largest MSOs in the world, Curaleaf, has decided to shut down its licensed legal dispensary in West Palm Beach, Florida, and open a hemp-only products store. It's called the Hemp Co. and marks the first all-hemp retail store developed by a multi-state operator in cannabis. The conflict with the overregulated legal cannabis market is now being undermined by a less potent, unregulated hemp product. Our man, who is high on Wall Street, is Doug Miller, and even in these volatile times, Doug manages to find stocks that are ripe for investment right now. Here's Doug.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Curaleaf opened a new medical cannabis dispensary in Winter Park, Florida, just in time for 420. Curaleaf has a total of 66 stores in Florida and 151 nationwide. This is the biggest week of the year for the industry with 420, so let's see how the biggest MSO is doing. Curaleaf's trading around 98 cents, and it's been running up from that 67-cent area, and it's looking good to continue its way up. The market's been a little choppy, so be sure to trade smart and lock in those profits and enjoy your 420. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
That'll do it for the B block, and coming up next, more state reports, plus the opening of a new dispensary in Tewksbury, Massachusetts called Lazy River Products. This is their second dispensary to open in the Bay State. Lazy River Products also has a vertical production facility and dispensary in Dracut. As you might expect, a lot of their business comes from over the border in New Hampshire because it's very close to New Hampshire. The Granite State is the only one in New England that still does not have open legal adult use sales, something their neighboring states of Vermont, Massachusetts, and Maine all enjoy. Dispensaries near the New Hampshire border are all booming with consumers from New Hampshire as thousands of dollars leave that state every week as consumers go over the border to get their weed. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discovered that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. Get some medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.